from being data mindful. And there we go. So welcoming everybody to this week's Leadership Circle around humanizing transformation. And hey, are we heading for a data crisis is something that I want to talk about. Well, actually, what's really interesting is that I think when we're talking about data, right at the very beginning, I think we're in this really, really interesting place. On the one hand, we may well be, careering towards a data crisis. But on the other hand, with all of the opportunity available to us, we could actually be also on the precipice of a data revolution. So we've got these two things playing. And I find that really fascinating, just as a very kind of opening gambit to this whole idea of data. And of course, when we're talking about data, we're talking about something so big, something constantly changing, that 45 minutes, even with Melanie on 1.75 speed, ain't gonna get through everything. So again, today I think it's really just scraping and scratching the surface. But crisis over revolution, I think, is a really interesting thing to start with. And when we're talking about crisis, really what we're talking about is the lack of skill and confidence at a workforce level around data. And there really is, and you can see on the top right hand side there, only 25% of surveyed employees feel a sense of confidence around data. And interestingly, given that that is all employees, that 25% are most likely to be in roles that have got some sort of data competency requirement to them. So really, really, really interesting. And then I think that the other quote in terms of are we heading toward a data crisis at the bottom right hand side, this is something that really surprised me when I came across this particular statistic from DataCamp, is that they've been measuring and studying this sense of organizations saying that they're becoming data driven over the years. And you can see here 37% in 2017, 31% in 19, 24% today. So the number of organizations that are saying they are successfully becoming data driven is on a steady decline. And yet we're pumping in money, and transformation is becoming an incredible priority, etc., etc., etc. So this crisis element is really, really profound. And equally, at the same time, we've got wonderful things happening. We've got a reskilling revolution that the World Economic Forum talk about, and the fastest growth rate of roles that are emerging now and forecasted in the next 5 years all have a data element to them. So we know this stuff is big, and we know that the opportunity is big, but equally our present situation is grappling with something that feels more like a crisis. So it's how are we able to, through the concept of humanizing transformation, potentially address some of this. And I say potentially because I've got to really, there's a big caveat to how big all of this is. And also when we talk about data, it's bits and pieces, right? So I think when organizations talk about data, I think really what they're saying is they're alluding to not necessarily the zeros and the ones and the tiny little bits of data. They're really alluding to the information that can be derived from data, and that information, when we are able to assimilate it as human beings, can give us knowledge. And when we are knowledgeable, the more knowledgeable we are, the more ability we have to apply wisdom to our roles and our responsibilities. So I think this data DIKW pyramid is something that is interesting to share with people, because it gives us this sense of, well, it's not, that there is there are components to this, and there's more to it than just these data bits and pieces. So humanizing transformation, what we talk about, what we're here to explore today, what is our take on this? Well, our take on this is something that we call data mindfulness, and it's great because you have a little bit of scratchy head when we're in a leadership room and we say, right, we're gonna help you build some data mindfulness, and they're looking at you as if you've got kind of two heads. It's quite great. But what do we mean by data mindfulness? Well, if we think about data just in terms of that pyramid, thinking about the journey from individual bits of data that flow through a human equally as much as a machine, right? So data comes through a human as an idea, as energy, as thought, equally as much as it flows through a machine as a 0 and a 1. So when we're talking about data, we're talking about the data that flows through human and machine. We've got all of that hopefully is helping us on that journey towards knowledge and wisdom. But what we want to do is to address the crisis, and then to be able to stop and think about the opportunity in that revolution is to introduce some, mindfulness to how we think about data. So what we've done over the years is we've coined this phrase called data mindfulness, and we have got training that we support and mentoring and coaching around this concept of data mindfulness. And here today, I'm going to be giving you guys a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of it. The journey to becoming data mindful has to follow the curve of human transformation, which is not a linear, diagonal line that a project and a program normally has, and it's not a beautifully created Gantt chart, which it's messy. There's energy, there's emotion, it's human, there's complexity, right? There's uniqueness, individualism, all of that kind of stuff. So we have to follow the curve of human transformation. And in order to do that, to become data mindful, what we do is we look at the first 4 stages: awareness, to build a sense of data consciousness, the consciousness around data. Number 2, an assessment of our relationship with data, as well as the maturity of data in our own behavior and data around us. To align, and what we mean by aligning is really, is the approach that we're taking personally or at an organizational level congruent with purpose and values, be that for the transformation that we're working on, or indeed, ideally, the organization itself. And activation, got to start small, and this is incredibly important, really, really important. So just to let you know that these really are the 4 things that we consider in terms of the journey towards helping organizations and individuals become data mindful. So data mindfulness for us really is how we look at these 4 areas. So there's 4 quadrants to data mindfulness. It's connection, it's health, it's flow, and it's accountability. So we're looking at these 4 areas. When we're talking about data mindfulness and in bringing it into context of humanizing transformation, the one thing that I will say to you is this: first and foremost, it's about role modeling. And research now, a lot of research that Accenture have been doing, what they're recognizing is one of the biggest ways to accelerate a sense of data confidence or consciousness within an organization is to encourage role modeling. So, who we are as role models for data mindfulness or being data conscious in an organization has got huge amounts of potential and power to shift us from crisis into revolution. So what I want to do is I just want to give us a little bit of a smorgasbord for how we individually as practitioners in transformation can ourselves role model connection, flow, help and accountability. If we've got time at the end of me sharing what we can do ourselves, then I have also got some slides that follow the same process, but how we might be able to work with groups and teams, departments and entire human systems if we've got time. But the slides are there if you would like me to send them to you. So the first one is connection. And when I start talking about data with anyone, I always say that we are data and data is us. And really, it's about reconnection. We have always, as human beings, had a connection with data, because we wouldn't be where we are today without us telling stories, without us assimilating as human beings information to create into knowledge and wisdom to share. So I think for me, it's about how we reconnect human beings to their relationship, to reconnect who they are with data. And what's lovely is to start to think about the history of humans and data. And Our relationship with data absolutely predates our relationship with any digital technology, because we've got 50,000 to hundreds of thousands of years of humanity. So our relationship with data is really, really long in the tooth. And we just want to reconnect people with that. What you can see at the bottom there is a blog, and that blog is fabulous. It's a blog by a lady called Dr. Hannah Fry. And those of you that are into documentaries, which I am, she's a mathematician. She does a lot of BBC documentaries on TV. And this is her talking about the reconnection and the connection between humans and data, that relationship. It's a beautiful thing. But that connection with data is where we need to start. Don't go straight into cybersecurity and compliance and data literacy and all of that kind of stuff. We need to get people to just reconnect with data, you know, the purpose, context and stories. I say to people, I remember when I was a kid and I used to answer the phone and I used to say, hi, here 3587, Melanie speaking, and my dad would almost flip me over the ear off for it, because he'd be like, what are you doing? You don't know who's on the other end of the phone. You know, that is data, that is our private data that you're sharing. Really, really interesting. So, you know, I was taught outside of the digital revolution a little bit of data mindfulness, the connection with data. So how can we bring people on the journey of that? It's a really important thing. So some questions and things that you might want to think about for yourself is, how often do you reflect on your relationship with data and the history of our wider relationship with data? Have you ever done that? You know, is this the first time that somebody's even kind of given that thought to you? And also to kind of reflect on your current beliefs around data. I was talking with a group of practitioners yesterday, and one of the practitioners said they really struggle with this data piece because they have got a limiting belief around data, that it's all about science and it's all about complexity and it's all about, you know, really academic stuff. So they've got a limiting belief that they just switch off. So, you know, it's really interesting to just help people to talk about their belief system around data. I think for us all as practitioners in a transformation and, you know, helping other individuals or organisations lean into the future, I think it's really interesting for us to be thinking about how connected we are to the future story of data, you know, in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and where that is going and how data is connected and what are some of the implications and the ethical implications of that. We should be thinking about that ourselves. It's not just the data scientists or the data specialists. How are we currently, you know, leveraging data to make decisions? And you know, just thinking about that, and a couple more things in there. So really just reflecting on our own personal connection with data and how it leans in with our own belief system and story is super important. The next element, which is arguably the biggest in terms of things to do, is of course health. And when I'm talking about the health of data, I'm talking about how healthy the data is that we've got in order for us to, you know, generate information, knowledge and wisdom, but also how healthy are our behaviours around data. So it's really important for us to think about health in two ways: the health of the data that we have access to, but also our own health in terms of behavior. So it's kind of, you know, it's a little bit of, is this data true or false? Is this data truth and fact, or is it perception and reality? There's a lot in here that we talk about versus which is past, present and future data as well. Not necessarily the time to discuss that in depth today, but I think health as a summary is really about data quality. So what are some of the things that we might want to think about? Well, our relationship with the use of data, as I mentioned, the health of the data that we are using, really important. Now, we don't need a data scientist in the room or a data specialist in the room to be having these conversations with teams either. So we need to, you know, just be thinking about that. Something that I ask leaders is this: how healthy are your decisions? You know, as a, you know, dramatic pause in the room when people really assimilate that the question that's just been asked of them, but it's a great opener for discussion. If you're thinking about literacy, and I think literacy is just one small component of the wider health of data in terms of behaviour and the data itself that we are have access to, then you can really look at the framework of data literacy, which is about the data that we read, we work with, we analyse, and we argue. So data literacy is really about those four components. I'm not here to talk to us about that particular framework, but if you want to have a look at the digital literacy framework, I've got some links in the notes section of these slides if you would like them. Asking why is one of the strongest ways that we can discern the health of the data that we're receiving and our behaviour around data. Really, really important thing. And also, for me, another thing that I'll pick up on this one is considering the origin story of data. This is really important because a lot of the time people are going, we need the data. You know, we've got to get all of that data. And how much data do we need in order for us to be data driven or data informed? Well, you know, and this is something that data scientists are supported in favouring, is think about the sources of data. Think about how you can generate source data, owned data, unique data to you, rather than just capturing more and more and more data. So I think, you know, more sources over more data is a really important thing that can help us with the health of the data that we've got and the health of our own behaviour around data. The next thing I want to talk about is flow. And this is, again, like data mindfulness itself. It's probably something that isn't always really articulated or talked about. But we have what's called a data chain. And this is great. You know, we use this in workshops with teams, with leaders. I actually use this in my own one-to-one mentoring with leaders as well, is to get people to create a data chain. So, you know, to start thinking about, what data do I create? What data do I seek? What data am I in receipt of, or have I got access to? What data am I amending, that I am given, that I'm amending and I'm changing? What data am I sharing, whether that is sharing it you know, with no amendment, whether it's reporting or out in the ether or just changing format? And what data am I archiving, maybe with a little belief that I might be deleting it, but am I? A little bit of critical thinking there. And it's really, really nice just to get people, to give them space and time to create their data daisy chain. It's really nice, it's really simple, there's nothing scary in it, but it gets people to understand the flow of data through their practice and to see where there might be things stuck, whether there are gaps, where there might be hemorrhaging data, you know, too much data and actually we don't need all of it. All of these things are really important. And I think one of the other things that is important to me around this daisy chain and the flow of data is that it gives us a sense of integrity. You know, it's a little bit like Chinese whispers. You whisper something in the ear of somebody and then you get that same thing going through lots and lots of people, and by the time it gets back to the original person, it's a completely different story. So the integrity of data, to see how it stays true to its original source and meaning, is really important for us as well. And flow consciousness gives us the ability to do that. Some of the questions I ask people when they go through the data chain is, which stage in the chain do you feel is your strongest? Which one do you feel is your weakest? What can we do about that? You know, a question that I would like to ask everybody on today's call: how consciously aware are you of the flow of data through your practice? Really, really important. And then balancing that with, are you conscious more of data that flows through tech than you are of data that flows through human, in terms of sensing another person's data, their energy, their emotion? That's all flow of data. So again, you know, marrying up and harmonizing the idea of data through technology as well as through human, it's all valid data for us to be able to, you know, head up that triangle towards physical wisdom. Really, really important. And the last 2 points there, of course, as I've mentioned before. So that's a little bit around flow, which is a really big part of data mindfulness for us. The final one, which for many people is the kind of big kahuna, is accountability, isn't it? We need so much more accountability around data. And accountability is really also leaning into so much around ethics, especially if you're thinking about the future of data in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning, how we are starting to connect things with other things, and the data that we can derive, the data that we're listening to, of people that we can, the data that we've got potential to capture. There's a huge ethical implication there. So ethical relationships, ethical decision making. And one thing that I try and encourage all of our customers to do in leadership teams and even departmental teams, if there isn't something that's organizational there wide, then just get some ethical agreements in place for you and your team around where you might be starting to use new technologies or starting to bring in some modern practices into the ways that you guys are working for service redesign and new service deliveries. What are the ethical agreements that we are going to stand by as a team, and knowing when enough is enough. I think that's really important as well. If we've got more data than we need, all we're doing really is increasing the potential for loss and of integrity and security, etc., etc. So it's really important for us to think about our own accountability. This one, in terms of role modeling, and the first element, which is the connection, I think these two are super important to get people on the journey to understand that, it's data is not separate from me. It's not something that's elitist and specialist. And point one. And point two, data is something that's really powerful and really meaningful in my life, and I need to take responsibility for it and not necessarily think it's if it goes wrong, it's somebody else's job. So how do you hold yourself to account when it comes to data, and how often do we question our own decision making? This is something that I'm doing at the moment. I'm doing a little bit of an exercise with some of our practitioners, and I'm really leaning into this one. And have you got clarity of your own ethical values around data? This is interesting, because if you have a conversation with somebody about their personal life, and and when they're going and surfing online, or their habits and their preferences and behaviours around social media and some of the mobile apps that are out there, people are more likely to have a set of values that they live by that are data driven in their personal life, their private life, than in their professional life, because they think that is to be given to them. But actually, I say absolutely not. Let us open up the conversation and let us see where people's ethical values are around data personally, and see how we might be able to, and they might be able to replicate them and integrate them and bring them into their professional life. And again, that might be just somebody, in the most, unlikely of places, being a role model. And of course, as I've mentioned before, that competence around championing the ethical implication of future decisions around data, with everything that's coming along, privacy, that, if we are to say yes to that technology and therefore capture that data, does that mean that we'll be open to manipulating people's behaviors around that data as we use it? There's these conversations are conversations that should be democratized conversations, as opposed to specialist and expert driven and leadership driven conversations. So those are the 4 key areas of data mindfulness that are relevant to each and every one of us, for us to be role models, to build our consciousness and to reconnect our relationship, to deepen perhaps our relationship with data. And of course, all of it is part of the professional certification in Humanising transformation. And forgive me, but that is one of the main reasons why we come along, to add value and to widen people's understanding of what humanising transformation is all about. Data mindfulness is a tiny component of that, part of the wider Dilyn Way framework and approach. So, really important for everybody to know that as practitioners, there is an opportunity for you to become certified in this wider framework and approach. And also, if you want to come and have a chat with me, and I know, one or two of you on the call today already have, which is great, just come and have a conversation with me. This stuff is really important. This stuff is so important to our future. And if, 1 hour with me helps you be a role model and be done, that to me is progress, absolutely progress in the right way. So in the chat, you should be able to see a little link to a Calendly that is my own Calendly, and take advantage of it and pop in an hour, and we'll be able to talk a little bit about where you are and where you're going, and how you might be able to potentially accelerate success for your own professional career, but also your transformation. Which brings me just on to 9:30, and hopefully, if everybody feels a little bit energized and you haven't fallen asleep with me, the opportunity for me to just whiz through what we might be able to do in terms of applying data mindfulness in these 4 quadrants into teams and systems. So I'm just going to take a stop break here and just see, pop it into chat, or just shout over your screen to me. Would you like to open up to some reflections? Have you got some questions for me at this point? Would you like me to track on in my Formula One Ferrari voice into looking at how we might be able to apply this to groups and teams? So where's everybody at the moment? Pop it into chat, or let me know if you have a question or a thought.
Hi, Mel.
Hi.
Last week, I think you mentioned that you've done quite a bit of work with local authorities.
Yes.
And so have I. And I'm always struck. I don't say this because there are so many local authorities, in this country, that I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of all of them. But the ones I have done a bit of work with, I'm always struck by how much data they have flowing through their organizations. And the ones I have worked with, and there've been some big London local authorities I've done work with, they don't seem to use that data strategically to help design their services, or target their services, or deploy resources strategically. And why do you think that is? Do you think that's because they're sitting on all that data, don't know what to do with it, or they're scared that they will breach people's, they're breaching ethics, or what?
Well, it's a really good question. I think, to respond to you without deep reflection, I would say that there's a few things that contribute to that. I think the first thing is absolutely, when you're talking about public service, you do have, it should be the same as private sector, but there is a heightened awareness of protecting the integrity and the security of citizens and society's data. So I think that is one thing that is really important to note, and therefore it leads into the second point for me, which is when you look at the traditional way that the area of data has developed over the years, it has been something that is very specialist and very expert driven, and therefore has and very closed first. It's let's make sure that let's close all the gates and then prove which gates can and should be opened. And that is traditionally how it's been. So the hierarchy of ownership and and responsibility has gone to the top, so it's separated from the mass. And the second thing is, let's make sure that everything's closed. Let's start at closure and open it up. So I think the tide is just turning there. With information governance, and I think if you go to the old innovation lab of New Zealand government, the government innovation lab, and the work that Pia Matthews did on open information governance. So let's start open, and then close from that point. Some really, really, really interesting stuff there. So I think, and also the tide is turning in terms of democratization. A lot of research is showing that if you're able to democratize, data in terms of that, then that will help. But the thing that we're struggling with democratizing data, Ravi, is this: people are already disconnected with it. They're already scared of it. Only 25% of people are confident with data. If 75% of people are unconfident with data, they're not connected to it. So I think there's something about that first quadrant connection that is really super important as well. I know that's not a simple story. And also, can I also say that at a leadership level and at local authority, I think at a senior leadership level, that lack of confidence and fear is there. That separation is there. So I think the connectivity bit is incredibly important in terms of human connection with data. Amber, I noticed that you had your hand up there as well to respond to Ravi and myself.
Yeah, I did. I thought that was a really interesting question and something I've noticed in my work. And I was wondering, do you think it's that the basis on which people make decisions is changing? So in some organizations, the structures of authority are to do with investing in this person here being the person that makes decisions about this stuff. And so they develop over time a framework of values and hypotheses and expectations about how their domain works. And actually, it would be quite a significant change for them to be really open-minded about being data-led, because the only time that they need to reach for data is to prove a hypothesis that they already have. So you only pull the data together when you're putting a business case together or when you're arguing for a policy change or something. It's not a horizon scanning data practice. It's not an exploratory data practice. It's just quite instrumental about going and getting what you need to make the point about what you think you need to do.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. We'll come to Ravi for a response in a moment, Amber. I would agree with that. And what's interesting about what you're saying there is how there's limiting belief in that, because what we've got in there is we've got people that are seeing data as binary on off. So I go through my day and I'm off. I've got a report to write and I need data and I'm on. So data is off and data is on. No, it's always on. There is flow of data and it's back to that connection and flow. So I think there's limiting belief and also this sense of binary as well there when it comes to data. Ravi, I think what Amber was saying there is really relevant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole thing of hierarchy and who sits on top and leadership is really important, because their relationship, especially in things like local authorities and local government or public sector, organizations tend to be very hierarchical. And a change of leadership or succession can bring massive change, because that one person's relationship with data. I personally think we've been managing data for centuries. I mean, if you just look at a corner shop, person who owned a corner shop and the penny sweets, that person will know that Coke bottles sell twice as quickly as white mice or something like that, and will order accordingly, right? Because they don't want dead stock on their shelves. So for him, there's an advantage to managing data, and he or she will do it in their own way. And I think if you look at people like the Amazons now and the eBays of this world, they don't even question why they should use data, or maybe they're slightly unethical about it. I don't know. I'm sure. Maybe, I don't know. But they know they've got loads of data coming into them, and they deal with it and they process it to their advantage. And I think you're right, Mel, that there's an uncomfortableness, I think, in the public sector, and they've just got data coming into by virtue of their daily operations. They don't even have to go out and seek it. It just comes to them because they need it. And but local authorities tend to be so disparate in their business. So you can have adult social care, you can have education, housing, and they're all sitting on loads of data. And one thing they don't do is don't share between themselves to find trends and patterns. And also they don't protect themselves, because you can have problematic residents, say, for instance, in a local authority, are presenting themselves to the local authority in different guises, through housing, through childcare. And if they're, slightly aggressive in their persona or whatever, it's I found, I did a project whereby departments were nervous to share that intelligence between themselves, which are putting their own staff at risk. And that's not to say that their ultimate, their aim should be to withhold service to that person, but just manage how they provide that person with service. And that's a simple example of data sharing.
Absolutely. And Ravi, what have you done? You've just proved that this is about humanizing, isn't it? This is a human thing. And it's really interesting because when you think about data in terms of where it really does exist at a mass level, at a workforce level, more often than not, it's very little beyond mandatory compliance training. Everybody's got to do this hour tick box so that we comply with regulation, but it's not necessarily the human leaning in. And I am constantly surprised at how little learning and development, like true learning and development, not training, but learning and development, there is around this subject. And when I question and challenge people in HR and L&D, learning and development, do you know what I get? Well, we don't know. We're trying to work this out for ourselves. Yeah, that's another human story. It's really, honestly, Ravi, for me, I just think this particular area is so important to us. And, we all seem to be having the digital conversations. And for me, I just think, gosh, you know what? I think we should be having the data conversations. I really, really do, because the digital is the vehicle through which data flows, and that's only half of it. Data also flows through human beings. We've got something really, really big and broad and deep here for us to be working on. So absolutely cool. Blimey, there are nuances, definitely. There are nuances in terms of public service, and even when you come down to a local authority level, there are further nuances, because the silo, it's not just that there are silos, it's the number of silos, because a single authority can have 200, 300 different services, and each one of them could potentially be still in silo 2022, but that's the reality, isn't it? So absolutely. What I want to do, just very briefly, if it's all right with you guys, is just take you through a couple more slides, 4 more slides, because there's 4 quadrants, just in terms of some of the things that we might be able to, something to pique your interest about how we might be able to deal with this at the wider workforce level. Just to share with you at the bottom here, what I've got is the Data Literacy Index Framework, which is the data literacy project that Click and Wharton Business School own and lead, but they have a little framework that says that there are 3 elements that lead towards more healthy data consciousness and mindfulness and maturity: access to data, skills around data, and a data-driven culture. I think all 3 of those neatly fit into the 4 quadrants of data mindfulness. What I would argue is that I'm not necessarily sure that those 3 are enough. I think that there's a lot more to be doing. So if we're thinking about teams and groups and departments and entire workforce systems, what are some of the things over and above what we've already shared that we might want to think about? And when it comes to connection, I think it's really important is context. And Amber, you kind of alluded to that yourself. So what can we do to build that connection with data, to reconnect people with data? We are data, data is us, and give them context, space and time to reconnect. Literally just allow people time to talk about this thing, talk about it. Visibility, visibility in an organization, visibility of data plans, even if there are sensitive data in a data plan in terms of, if it gets into the wrong hands, that data can be redacted, but just sharing data plans with people, sharing data strategies. I am working with a customer at the moment on a data strategy that I know is probably about 70–80% complete. It has taken weeks for me to get the data team to give me visibility and sight of that. And do you know why? Because they're perfectionists. It's not complete, so we can't share it with you. I'm like, no, share it with me. So we've also got to help people that are in the world of data to share and to make more of what they're doing and what they've got visible, because that gives people context. Helping people to recognize that there is diversity now. You know, it's 2022. Most organizations have got Teams and Outlook and PowerPoint and, you know, maybe a mural or a Miro. There is different types and channels and formats for us to receive and communicate data. So we can be customizing data to our own unique nuances. Being absolutely clear on purpose of data within an organization is really key, and democratizing. And Ravi, you know, I think we kind of alluded to that in your comment and your question. Accenture in their research have said the democratization of data alongside role modeling of data are arguably two of the most important things. It's not just building the skills, it's these two things. How are we democratizing data, both in terms of the data itself to where it needs to be when it needs to be there and responsibility, but also building visibility and role modeling in the organization. Those two things could potentially for us be far more important than just digital literacy skills. So when it comes to health, number one on the agenda is absolute role modeling. Absolute role modeling. Number two on the agenda for us is development campaigners. And we don't say development programs, we say development campaigns, because it's not really about saying, oh, guess what? You know what? Sarah, you're going to go on a 6-week course on the fundamentals of data, you know, in a couple of weeks' time. It's not about these on-off longitudinal training programs. What we need to do is we need to get tiny little moments and experiences. You know, share a really good book with someone, just tiny little videos, bite-sized, regular and immersive experiences around data to infiltrate. People are so busy, they're doing so much with more. It's bite-sized and regular. If we can do that, then we've got an opportunity to customize. And if it's bite-sized and it's small and it's regular, then it means that we can iterate. And this is one thing that's really important for us to recognize. Data is one of the most fast changing things in business. It's not the tech, it's the data. Because even with an in situ piece of technology, there are loads of features and functions in that one single piece of technology that people are starting to get to understand and open up and learn about. More data, more data, more data. Data is increasing and changing and flowing and fast, and you know, it's enormous, which means that the quality of the data that we looked at yesterday could potentially not be the same quality today. It's so fast changing, so it gives us iterative. Making data about stories and making it practical and academic is so incredibly important. And the other thing that I say to organizations is this: there's so much free development out there, so you don't even need to worry about investment. There's so much out there. Google, Tableau, the Data Literacy Project, there's loads out there that you can bring into an organization, into a team, and give access to. We have something called Keystone Habits. I won't necessarily talk about that in depth today, but Keystone Habits are really great for accelerating the ability for people to become more data conscious and to lose a sense of limiting belief and fear around it. Really, really important. So just some things around health there. Conscious of time, moving on. Flow is exactly the same, but what I say to people is, you know what? Just get teams to play around with flow mapping, that data chain that I showed you earlier on. I cannot tell you how valuable and powerful that is for people to just recognize and understand data a little bit more and reconnect with it. And really, really important for me is get data out of IT or specialist areas. You know, how do you get data into business as usual? Forget about digital champions. Get data champions in as well. And also data champions en masse Then we want data curators, and data curators are people that really do have a skill around data. So they're there to support, they're mentors and coaches. And then, of course, beyond that, we've got the experts and the specialists. So data champions and data curators, hey, we can start doing that now. We don't need loads of investment, but we could get that into our organizations pretty damn quickly. Accountability is huge when it comes to the wider organization. Everything that I mentioned earlier on still stands, but I think what is really important when it comes to accountability is getting people to recognize the impact and consequence of data when it goes wrong, as well as the impact and consequence of data when it goes right, and to share some stories around that. Equally, I think it's important for us as teams is to put some agreements in place around consequence. You know, if we find that data is unhealthy, or if we find that our behavior around data is unhealthy, how do we hold ourselves to account? What is the consequence? Because we can't just let it go, we can't just let it ride. And one area of business that I find a lot of willful blindness in is data. It doesn't matter that we don't have all of it. I'll just fill in the gap with a little bit of an assumption and off we go. Or let's not deal with that now because we need to get that report done and we need to get that project out, so we'll deal with that. So there's a lot of willful blindness around data. And I think, you know, it's important for us to recognise that. So things like team manifestos, clear, visible measurements, you know. And the other thing as well that I think is really good about accountability is start. You know, there's no better time to start than now. And for me, it's, you know, if Ravi, local authority, I would say to a local authority, go and connect with education, with schools, with colleges. You know, in primary schools and secondary schools, we have a maths curricula, but we don't actually have data curricula. We can work together with them to bring and start bringing data mindfulness in, so that even if they're not our new recruits and our new talents in a local authority, they will be within the community, and we know that we're doing something to build that data mindfulness and conscious within community and society. And then again, you know, just broadening out this sense of data mindfulness and consciousness around data and recruitment and inductions, instead of it just being that 1 hour mandatory compliance that I mentioned earlier on. So there's loads of things that we can do, you know, and I think that what is beautiful about data, less so with digital, still there with digital, because digital is a little bit more specific to tech. When we're looking at data, there's a lot that we can do that we don't necessarily need big, massive, millions of pound business cases to go through approval for us to start getting some groundswell in our organisations, in our communities and workforce right now, today, you know, this week, which I just think is fantastic to start that revolution. I always end my leadership circles with a few banana skins. And for me, the two banana skins when it comes to data is don't disconnect yourself. You know, it's so easy for us to become disconnected from data. You know, Amber's example was absolutely brilliant. You know, to lull ourselves, you know, we're so busy and everything is so complex, we're doing so many different things, to just, you know, lull ourselves back into the old behavior of that on and off relationship with data. Don't disconnect. See if we can keep our consciousness around data alive through you know, how it flows through our days and practice. And the other thing I think is a big banana skin for us as role models is willful blindness. You know, both of these are really big banana skins. Willful blindness. How many times have we ourselves, when we're making decisions, said, "Oh, it's all right, you know, it'll be fine," when it comes to data, whether it's integrity or quality or gap. I think it's really important for us to really hold ourselves to account when it comes to willful blindness as well. So there we go. A few minutes over, but what I want to say is we're in the next week, we're going to put together a data mindfulness challenge in our community. And it's just going to be 10 days where we're going to just every morning send out a data mindful tip or a quote, a technique, or a little reflection to get people started. So if you fancy being a part of that, then just respond to the email that I send to you later on today, if not today, tomorrow, with today's replay in it for you to download and, you know, replay, share, whatever you want. And if you want the slides as well, just respond to that email as well, and I'll send you the slides on email as well. So if you want to be a part of the Data Mindfulness Challenge, we're going to greenlight that. We're going to launch it in the community next week. Just let me know if you want to be a part of it, and we'll share that with you. And that brings us really to the end of today. And what can I say? You know, yes, we are in this place where we are equally on the brink of a data crisis, as well as on the precipice of a data revolution. And I think we have got everything, every opportunity to turn everything around in favor of that revolution, to you know, really get into what all of that potential possibility that data mindfulness can bring. So, you know, it's time to practice data mindfulness. There we go, open up. I just will share with everybody, just got a few practices there, because the Dilyn way is all about practice as well. It's got a few habits in the back that I'll share with everybody for those of you that want slides. Got a couple minutes more, so I will close off today in terms of recording and bid everybody adieu, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for participating, your thoughts and your questions, Ravi and Amber in particular today. That's absolutely brilliant, thank you. I have a great day ahead of you. Amit, I saw you join earlier on, so great to have you listening and being with us today. Back here, same time next week with another humanizing transformation component that we're just going to look at, a little seed that we're going to put into the ground, and hopefully sow for you and your own practice. And I shall say thank you everybody for joining me today. Have a great day, have a great weekend. I'll press off record, but I'll stay for some questions or for some reflections if anybody would like to ask me anything in particular. Otherwise, thank you very much, and see you hopefully next week.